Get that all turned on this morning. Let's turn this morning to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. We're going to revisit some things that we visited many times in the past and not too long ago, but just something to kind of take our minds and our thoughts somewhere I think that we need to be reminded we ought to be on regular occasion. I believe it's important. Peter had written and said, I think it meet as long as I'm in this tabernacle to stir your pure minds up by way of remembrance. And so the Bible is written so that we might remember. So we're going to go to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. We're going to begin reading in verse 1. We're going to read through verse 8 together this morning. Paul, of course, is writing. And he says, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and have not charity, I become as a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains and have not charity, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. Charity suffereth long and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, doth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Charity never faileth, but whether there be prophecy, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. So, in our text, in the concluding verse, in verse 8, the first part of that, Paul says, charity never faileth. Or in other words, it never fails. What does that mean? Well, if you look at the Bible and you examine the word charity there, and I know that many of you might have a New King James or something else that might use the word love, but the King James used the word charity. What is Bible charity? And why is charity a good word? In my mind, why is it a good word? Well, because the word that's translated out of the original language there actually is a word different from love, even though it's the same thing. Because what it actually means, if you go back and pull it up, it means love in action. So charity is love in action. So in this way, this particular word translated charity in the King James is to me a deeper translation of the original word found in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. So he's talking about charity. He's talking about love in action. Now, can it fail? Well, no, Paul just said it couldn't. I mean, he just said it never fails. But there's something that we talked about this morning in Bible class in James chapter 3, and I'd like you to turn there with me for just a minute. And let's read together James chapter 3, verses 11 and 12. We were talking about this morning in Bible class about the value of us learning to control or to bridle our tongue. But in verse 11 and 12 of James chapter 3, James says, doth a fountain send forth at the same place sweet water and bitter? Can the fig tree, my brethren, bear olive berries, either a vine figs? So can no fountain both yield salt water and fresh. So what does that mean? When we're talking about a fountain, what does that mean? Well, we already should understand that a fountain is always the purest at its source. In other words, wherever it begins, wherever that water bubbles up out of the ground and comes to the surface, no matter how far it might run or how far it might travel, it's always the purest at its source. I don't know, but they tell me the Mississippi River, I believe it begins in Minnesota, and it's nothing but water simply coming out of the ground. And it begins to form and it keeps running down, and then all these different things feed into it and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. The Mississippi is a muddy river. They call it the Big Muddy. But at its source, at the fountain, I'm sure it's clear and it's pure water. It has a clearness about it. Because it has not traveled all that distance from the source. It's not been contaminated by all the different things that flow into it. Paul talks about charity, which is love, 1 Corinthians 13. And when we think about the word love, where does the word love begin? Well, forget about the word. Where does the emotion of love begin? Where does it start? Well, in reality, it actually starts with God. God is that fountain of love. And so love, the act of loving, the act of application of love, all starts with God. It begins drawing from that fountain. It's only as love travels far from the beginning, the source, does it begin to be tainted and begin to be spoiled and to lose its flavor. If our focus of love will be what it should be, if we'll focus our mind on the absolute source of love that we find in God, and let that motivate us in every action that we do in all of our affairs, then our love will be as pure as that fountain that begins with God. Let's turn to 1 John chapter 4. And let's go down and read together verses 7 and 8. And listen to what John says. John, by the way, who was known as the Apostle of Love. We'll talk about him just a minute, a little bit more after I read these two verses. Beloved, let us love one another. For our love is of God, and everyone that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. John, the apostle of love, was not always the apostle of love. James and John were the sons of Zebedee. It was these same pair who were sent to preach to a certain city along with the rest of the apostles, and when they did not hear their words, who came back to Jesus and said, let's rain down fire and brimstone and destroy these cities. And so Jesus gave them a different name. They were called the sons of thunder. There's a great deal of time from this John, who was called the sons of thunder by Jesus, to this same John who wrote and said what he said in 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 and 8, who concluded by saying, God is love. And who said, let's love one another. And of course, yes, he said those things by inspiration, but I believe when you read the letters of John, you can see that John learned that love and he meant it. He said what he meant what he said. Oftentimes we'll say, I love you, we don't mean it. Or we'll love somebody, but we won't say it. Or we'll love somebody, but we won't show it. But we need to direct our love by turning to the absolute source of love. And that is God. Because God is love. If we do that, can it fail? Can we fail in demonstrating our love, in making our love visible in our words and actions, our deeds? Can we fail if our love is patterned after the God who is the God of love? Or the love of God that is absolute? Can anything that God has promised, do any of things that God has purposed, do they ever fail? Well, never. Never. Why? Because He is the one constant in this world that surrounds us that is always changing. Look at the world. Look at how much the world has changed just in the last year. The last 4 years, the previous 4 years, the last 20 years. And it's going to change so much in this next couple of years that in many ways, things that we're so familiar with are going to be unrecognizable. I was down at Walmart the other day trying to find something to plug into an iPhone that would allow you to download your pictures off of it. They make a little deal you can plug in, and it has a card reader, and you can put the little disc in there. You can put USB, but it's not a USB. It's a micro USB. And I'm thinking, what happened to the majors? Now they got a micro. Looked like the micro ought to come first, and the major grew up out of it. Something brand new. And the lady was trying to explain to me, she said, oh, it's that new little port you see on laptops. And I said, you mean the one that plugs into the new charger cord for the iPhone? She said, that's it. That's a micro. It's okay. Changing constantly. But God is consistent. And God is constant. The Hebrew writer said in Hebrews chapter 13 about verse 6, God said, I'll never leave thee nor forsake thee. And the same writer said Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He wasn't talking about God's system of demonstrating His love. He was talking about the consistency of God's love. God has always consistently, without change, loved man. So when we're talking about His charity, His love, it can never fail if it's applied. Now, it's always applied by Him, but also it's required of us as Christians that we apply that same love also. The act of love, charity, that Paul is talking about here is a constant result in encouragement when taken to God's intended measure. The impact that it has in the lives of those around us, our enemies, our friends, our neighbors, our brethren, the impact cannot be denied. The consistency is always there, but it has to be applied. And we have to apply it with a consistency in our life. It has to be a constant in our life, and have the confidence that if I do the right thing, no matter what I perceive is being done to me, if I do the right thing, God's love is going to work. It's going to cover, as Peter said, the multitude of sins. But consistency is needed on our part to achieve long-term results. But one done, it works. Tammy and I will be married 50 years come January. What if every day it changed? What if today she walked in the door and I said, I hate you? And then tomorrow she came in, I love you. And she picked up the pattern, and so on the day I said, I hate you, she said, I love you. And on the day she said, I love you, I said, I hate you. Where's any consistency with that? In order for it to work, for it to function, you and I have to make up our mind every day that we're going to approach everything and everyone with equality with this same consistent pattern of love that God has established. Because God is love. I want to be like God. Who doesn't want to be like God? Raise your hand. So I want to use the same consistent pattern that never fails that God uses in my dealings with everyone. Because the beauty of it comes from the source of true love. He's responsible for everything good and perfect, James said. James 1 and verse 17. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. In other words, he never changes. You don't have to worry and turn your head and think you're going to see him move out of the way. He's still right there. You're not going to catch a glimpse of him changing out of the corner of your eye at all, because he's always the same. Consistent in every good thing that he brings, and never responsible for anything bad. It's a shame we can't say the same thing, isn't it? But what we want to do is we want to strive to be like God. So is the act of love perfect? Well, if you look at the gospel, James identified the gospel as being the perfect law of liberty. Paul said, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. It's the power of God unto salvation. So God's love is perfect in every way. His love is. What we need to decide this morning, and decide every day, is mine. Am I consistent? Because God's love will not fail. But can our love fail? See, the sad thing is that sometimes the only way that somebody's able to see the love of God is they see his love as it works, as it is applied in our own lives. They won't see it unless they see it through me. And they're not going to see it unless they see it through you, because God works this perfect love not only through the gospel but through the lives of men and women that the gospel reaches. Which means it works through me and it works through you. Now, let's ask the next question. Can we fail? We asked that a while ago. Can his love fail? The answer is no. Can we fail? Can I fail? Do I fail in demonstrating the kind of love that I ought to demonstrate to all those that I come in contact with? Now, it can't fail except if we let it. And it'll only fail when we let it fail. But our love fails when we allow ourselves to drift too far from the source. I've gotten away from the head of the fountain, and I'm starting to drink downstream like some kind of animal. And I'm not willing to turn back to the source and absorb the pure water and take it in, that my love might abound in all things, as God would have it abound. I'm down here drinking with the horses and the mules and the sheep and the goats. Why not go back to the source? Because his love is enduring. His love is perfect and it's absolute. And even without my response, no matter how I choose to be, God is going to continue to love. And even if I rebel, no matter how I choose to be, God is going to continue to love. And he alone is always long-suffering. And he alone is never willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. He is. But you know what? We should be in all our doings as is He. Let this mind be in you which was also in Christ Jesus. Listen to me. Hear me? We've got to learn. We've got to learn to love others. And we've got to learn to love others all with the same passion of enthusiasm and the same consistency as does God. Because if we don't, John says, hey, you don't know God. But love is a natural thing, isn't it? Yeah. But it's not always easy to love, is it? But you know what love always is? It's always these things that Paul mentions in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Let's just go back there for just a minute. Let's start in verse 4, and I'm going to just say these things to you, but you can follow along because I cheated and I wrote them down as we read together about love or charity. Get your Bible. Let's look. Charity suffereth long. What does that mean? It means it patiently endures. It doesn't say, I forgave them of this last week, or I forgave them of this last year, like we're keeping a tally, and I'm tired of it, I'm not going to do it anymore. What it says is, it suffers long. It patiently endures. As Jesus told his disciples, how all shall I forgive? And he said, they said 7 times a day. He said 70 times 7. He's talking about the same offense. 490 times. That's an impossibility. No, it's not. Not when you love. It patiently endures. Charity is kind. That means to be usefully benevolent. Kindness is benevolence. Benevolence that cannot be applied is unuseful. Love that is not consistently kind cannot be used. So I'm going to be kind. He says, this charity envieth not. That means it's not moved by petty envy or petty jealousies. I want to be first. Can I be first? Let me be first, please. If I'm not first, I'm not going to play. You don't want to sit on that bench, brother. You best take your seat in line and wait till it's your turn and enjoy the fact that He has allowed you and He's allowed me to be a partaker of His love. It vaunteth not itself. In other words, doesn't lift itself above others. What do you mean there are no divas in God's kingdom? There are no superstars? The only one that ever was Jesus. I'm not Him. The only one that ever was Jesus, and you're not Him. Charity doesn't vaunt itself. It's not puffed up. That means to be proud and haughty. Look at me compared to all these others around. Like the Pharisee and the publican. The Pharisee prayed to God and said, I thank Thee that I am not as other men, like this publican. And the publican wouldn't even lift his eyes to heaven, but asked God to forgive him, a sinner. Jesus made it crystal clear who was justified there. It was not the one that was puffed up, proud and haughty. Charity doth not behave itself unseemly. There's an interesting word. It means to behave ourselves in response to others by acting right. It's very disappointing when we see folks who just simply don't know how to act right, isn't it? You're a mess. You never act right, you're a mess. We expect that out of people in the world. We don't expect that out of Christians. As a Christian, I have a right to expect you, when dealing with me, even if I make a mistake, even when I am wrong, to act right. God acts right. Doesn't mean God's not going to correct me, but God acts right while doing it. I'm going to be a mess. I'm not going to act right. Again, I'm going to take my toys and I'm going to go home. That's not how charity obeys. That's not how charity behaves. Doth not behave itself unseemly. Charity seeketh not her own. That means that kind of love looks to the welfare first of others, and looks to the feelings of others in every action that it does. I'm going to think about, how do I need to do this and how do I need to handle this where it works the best for you? Because I'm a Christian. And I want to help you as we go together to a place called heaven. What have we done if we respond in such a way that both of us end up missing heaven and both of us end up in hell? In hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torments. Charity is not easily provoked. What does that mean, not easily provoked? That's something very simple. It just simply means give somebody the benefit of the doubt. Not every mistake made, even by a Christian, even if it's a sin, is something that was done to intentionally hurt you or to hurt somebody around you. They didn't even intend when they did that to hurt themselves. They were overtaken in a fault. That doesn't mean they said, you know what, I'm going to do this and this is wrong. It just means they were overtaken. They were caught off guard. And they sinned, yes, but perhaps unawares. I'm not going to be easily provoked because I'm a Christian. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt, and I'm not going to assume the worst. And even if I find out it's the worst it can be, I'm going to look for the best, and I'm going to encourage them to be the best that they can be. I'm going to be easily intrigued. And I'm going to help lift them up. And we're going to journey together to this place called heaven. Because charity doesn't get mad easy. And thinketh no evil. Oh, you walked by and you didn't pet my dog. I'm not going to ever forget that. And so from now on, every time I see your dog, I'm going to kick it out of the way. I'm going to run it off. I'm going to throw rocks at it. I'm going to try to make it move with the car. Because you didn't pet my dog. Charity doesn't wish harm on others, even if it's a dog. We wish the best. Charity rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth. That's an obvious reaction for the righteous. Because we use that tool to bring others to God with pureness of thinking in every deed done. Have you ever done something to somebody, whether intentional or whether accidental, and you beg their forgiveness and they'll say, "Oh, that's right, just forget it." Yeah, like that really matters. Or like, "You really mean that?" Or like, "Yeah, I'm really off the hook now." What that means is I'm going to hang on to that. Let me put that in my pocket here, and tomorrow when I need it, I'm going to pull it out like a gun. Is that how charity behaveth? Charity beareth all things. In other words, we carry, we bear one another's burdens to lighten a heavy load. In Galatians 6, verse 2, Paul said, "Bear you one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ." What law is he talking about? Oh, what do you know? It's that very law of love that he mentioned in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And he says, "Charity believeth all things." We're motivated by faith, not by sight, not tainted by feelings, but we are moved by faith. Charity hopeth all things. We're filled with trust. As we move forward with those around us, never assuming the worst, enduring all things, we suffer as a Christian should, for as long as it takes. And by as long as it takes, I mean as long as it takes me to live my life in such a way that I can get to that wonderful place called heaven. That's the kind of endurance that charity brings. Because all these things we're talking about in 1 Corinthians 13 are all the results of a God-like love. When I take on the attributes that God demonstrates towards me, I become like God. His love is perfect. What I've got to figure out this morning, if we'll figure it out today, everything's going to be better from here on out. You might have it figured out. God bless you if you do. What I need to figure out today is His love perfected in me? Let me tell you something. I love you. When you look down that list and you see some of those things are missing in your life, you need to get to work on those things. And I mean now. If I'm going to be like God, I need to work on those things now. I don't need to wait until I get over being mad and festered before I start working on this. I need to put those things aside and I need to begin to work on this now. And I need to make sure that His love is perfected in me to everyone, not just a chosen few. Do I extend His love to all? Do I extend His love to my enemies? I'm supposed to. Do I extend His love to my friends? Certainly so. Do I extend His love to my brethren? Absolutely. First and foremost, primary before everyone else. Jesus said, "A new commandment I give, that ye love one another." He was talking about brethren. Put aside the silly things that sometimes we get offended by and make us different. Lay aside those things and love one another. Paul writes in Romans 12 and verse 10, it says, "Be kindly affectionate one to another with brotherly love in honor, preferring one another." Whose company do you prefer? If we start practicing what's in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 about love, we'll prefer one another's company. Peter writes in 1 Peter 4, verses 8 and 9, it said, "Above all things, have fervent charity or love among yourselves. For charity shall cover the multitude of sins. Use hospitality one to another without grudging." To be truly like God, we have to use this love, this charity, to all. by sometimes supporting them even when they're not so kind, supporting them with kindness. And especially so when those that we love struggle, even maybe when they're wrong-minded at the current time. We never are supposed to allow our hearts and our minds to drift away from the source of the fountain, which is God. But we love as God loves. If we drift away, we'll become bitter. And when we become bitter, eventually we'll fall. And when we fall, ultimately we take somebody with us. We practice the God-like love that endures. Let's look down together one more time in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 and look at verse 8. And you've only got to read the first 3 words, and this lesson will be yours. Here's the why of it all. Charity never faileth. If you'd have a reason this morning or a need to respond to the invitation in any way, you come now. While together we stand and we sing your encouragement.